I could smell the salt in the air before I heard my mother cry. That sound was thin, trembling like wind brushing against a window about to crack. When I stepped through the doorway, my mother was standing in the kitchen, still holding a dish towel, while my father, the man who once could lift a roof beam during a storm, was sitting with his head bowed like a scolded child. In front of him, a young man was pointing straight at my father, his voice sharp. "I told you, you can't stay here anymore. This is my house." That man was my sister's husband. The seaside house worth $500,000 that I'd bought as a gift for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary was now the place they were being thrown out of. I still remember the day I received my acceptance letter into the residency program in Boston. Mom cried. Dad gave a silent nod, and Cassidy shouted, "You're really going to be a doctor?" But in her eyes, I saw something else, admiration mixed with envy, as if I had taken something that was supposed to be hers. When I packed my suitcase to leave, Mom pressed a small envelope into my hand and said, "Don't forget your sister. You're the older one, you need to look after her." I nodded, not knowing that those words would become a chain binding me for almost 20 years. In those first years in Boston, I survived on watery coffee and sleep cut short by the beeping of heart monitors. I worked so much I lost track of days. But whenever my phone lit up with the name Cassidy, I always answered. At first, it was small things. "Hey, the school's asking for more textbooks. Can you send me a few hundred?" Then later, my car broke down and I don't have cash. I sent the money every time. In my mind, one thought always echoed. She's my sister. If I don't help her, who will? When I performed my first surgery, my hands still shaking, I got a message saying Cassidy had dropped out mid-semester. She said she needed a break to find herself, but in reality, she'd joined some friends to start an art startup that lasted barely 3 months. I sent her more money, enough to cover the unpaid rent on their studio. My parents said nothing, just looked at me with grateful yet expectant eyes, as if cleaning up Cassidy's mess was simply my duty. I worked even harder. Every month I set aside a fixed amount I called the Cassidy Fund. I joked with colleagues. Some people donate to charities. I donate to my sister. But deep down, it didn't feel funny. Cassidy changed boyfriends like outfits until she met Evan, a smooth-talking man who claimed he'd once worked in tech investments. The day I visited home, he shook my hand too firmly and said, "Delaney, I've heard so much about you. You're exactly the kind of person everyone wants to emulate." My mother beamed. "Finally, your sister found someone who can take care of her." I smiled, but a chill crept through me. His grip was too tight, and his eyes, those weren't the eyes of a grateful man. When they married, I paid for the entire wedding, flowers, music, everything. I didn't argue. My parents were close to retirement, and I didn't want them to worry. During the reception, Evan raised his glass to me and said, "If it weren't for Delaney, we'd still be saving up just to rent the venue." I laughed, but the sound felt hollow and tired, as if coming from someone else. They moved near my parents, while I stayed in Boston, working 12-hour days, sometimes with only a few minutes to call home. Each time, Mom would say, "Cassidy's trying hard. Evan's got a new project, he just needs a little more capital." I'd ask how much a little was, and she'd say, "Oh, nothing big." But the next month I saw a withdrawal of $10,000. Dad had taken it from his savings. I called Evan. His tone was calm. "You understand, right? Every investment starts with a little risk. But trust me, this project will change our whole family's life." I tried to stay composed. "I just want to be sure my parents aren't getting pulled into that risk." He chuckled. "It's not a risk, it's an opportunity. And don't worry, I treat them like my own parents." I should have known when someone says that. They usually see family as an open wallet. After that, Cassidy's messages started to sound different. "Hey, we're a bit short on rent this month, but don't tell Mom and Dad." Then, "We need to fix the car for the kids' school run." I sent money again and again. One time, in the middle of a shift, I got a text. "If you don't help, we'll lose the apartment." I'd never felt my chest so heavy, and ironically, I was a cardiologist. Each time I came home, my parents looked older. Their small house was buried under bills, the kitchen was cramped, the fridge half empty. I quietly paid everything, leaving a note that said, "Don't worry, I've got this." But I wasn't at ease. I felt like I was patching a leaking boat while the people at the front kept pouring water back in. One night, after a 13-hour surgery, I sat in the staff lounge, scrolling through a year's worth of transfers 17 times, helping Cassidy, totaling over $70,000. I wondered, was this love or an addiction to being needed? I started to pull back. I sent less money, replacing it with short check-in calls. Cassidy grew cold. "You've changed," she said. "All you care about is work," Evan added. "Ever think maybe you're abandoning your family?" I stayed silent, knowing anything I said would be twisted into guilt. Then the pandemic hit. The hospital was chaos. Nights felt longer than entire lives. I saved others while failing to save my own family. Mom caught a mild case. I shipped oxygen and medicine home. Evan called, his voice warm. "You're incredible. If you've got a little extra, we'd love to open a small cafe so your mom can relax." I knew I should say no, but when he mentioned, "your mom," my resolve melted. When Mom recovered, the cafe never existed. The money vanished with a promise. "We'll pay you back when we can." One June afternoon, Mom called, her voice shaking. "Cassidy says a realtor friend found a lovely beachfront house. She said if we chip in a bit, Evan will cover the rest." I knew disaster when I heard it. "Mom, don't sign anything," I warned. She hesitated, but she said it'd be a place for all of us to spend summers together. She said you'd love it. A thought flashed through me. If I couldn't change them, maybe I could create something different, something untouchable. A place where my parents could simply breathe in peace. That's when I began looking for a house by the sea. I visited dozens, driving for hours along the Maine coast. One day, I stood before a small white house, sunlight glinting off its windows, waves breaking gently against the cliff below. I imagined Mom watering flowers, Dad reading the newspaper, their laughter carried by the wind. I knew it was the one. I hadn't planned to stop, but something made me slow down as the sunlight reflected off those white window panes by the rocks. The house wasn't large or fancy, but it radiated a quiet stillness, as if waiting for someone, and I knew that someone was me. The narrow road curved downward, lined with wild grass and yellow blooms. The breeze carried the salt of the sea, cool and clean, brushing through my hair. The house stood alone on a rocky slope, faded blue roof tiles, white railings, and a row of low palms bending in the wind. I turned off the engine and sat there for a few minutes, just listening to the waves crash steadily against the cliffs, like a heartbeat calming after a long operation. When the realtor opened the door, the air smelled of old wood, salt, and a hint of dried lavender. Sunlight streamed through the shutters, tracing soft patterns on the floor. I walked slowly, running my hand along the wall, rough but warm. Not the warmth of sunlight, but the kind left behind by people who'd once been happy here. I passed the small living room, its window framing the ocean. Outside, waves broke against the rocks, scattering white foam. I imagined my father sitting there, a cup of tea in hand, light shining on his gray hair, his face serene. I pictured Mom playing music, cooking, maybe baking her Sunday toast. A house small enough that they'd never feel alone, close enough to the sea that the wind could replace a clock. "Would you like to see a few more options?" the realtor asked politely. Surprised that I'd gone quiet for so long, I shook my head. "No need," I said softly. "I think I found the right one." I signed the contract the next day. Everything was done quietly. No one knew, not even Mom. I set up a trust in my parents' names, making them lifetime owners so no one could interfere. I prepaid taxes and maintenance for 20 years, and stored a copy of the documents in a private bank vault. I'd grown used to planning like that in my line of work. "Caution doesn't just save lives, it preserves peace," the realtor said. "You're very thoughtful. Not many people think that far ahead." I smiled. I just want my parents to never have to fear losing anything again. 3 weeks later, I drove them there. The sky was so clear that day, the sunlight seemed to spill onto the ocean, blinding, but beautiful. Mom sat in the back seat, clutching her cloth bag, her voice half curious, half anxious. "Where are you taking us, honey?" I answered softly. "Somewhere I think you'll both love." Dad looked out the window and saw the silver shimmer of the sea. He smiled faintly. "It's been so long since I've seen the ocean. Feels like I'm young again." When the car turned down the narrow slope, the house appeared white, neat, with 2 windows slightly open to the breeze. Mom went silent. She looked around, then turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Delaney, what is this place?" "Go take a look, Mom." The door opened, and the faint scent of wood and lemon filled the air. Mom laid her hand on the kitchen counter, stroking it gently. Dad stood on the porch, gazing at the sea, the wind lifting the hem of his shirt. I walked over to them, my throat tightening. "Do you like it?" Dad smiled a soft, rare smile. "Like it, Delaney. This is paradise for 2 old folks." I took the keys from my pocket and placed them in Mom's hand. It's yours. The house is under your names. I wanted you to have a place that's truly your own. Mom stepped back, her voice trembling. Are you joking? This house. How much did it cost? It doesn't matter, Mom, I said quietly. What matters is that it belongs to you. She wrapped her arms around me. My sweet girl. You always make me proud and break my heart at the same time. You've done too much already. Dad laid his hand on my shoulder. You know, I've been losing sleep for years worrying about little things, fixing the roof, paying bills, medicine. For the first time, I feel like I can breathe without thinking about an invoice. We had lunch with sandwiches and lemonade bought along the way. Mom adjusted the table and spread out an old cloth she'd brought. Everything was simple, but there was something sacred in each movement. Sitting on the porch with the wind passing through, she said, "Do you hear that? The waves here aren't loud. It's like they're speaking." Speaking to who, Mom? To the house. It knows it's finally found the right people. I laughed. I wanted to believe that. As the afternoon faded, I stayed to check everything. I turned on each faucet, tested the stove, locked and unlocked doors. Listening to the creak of hinges that already felt familiar, I bought a few small potted plants and placed them on the porch. When dusk settled, Mom came out holding 2 cups of hot tea. Are you tired? She asked. No, Mom. I feel light. You don't say that often. She smiled, her eyes squinting gently. You're always so tense. Now you look more like the daughter I used to know. I leaned against the railing, listening to the waves. Inside, Dad was hanging their old wedding photo on the wall. Mom whispered. Your father kept that picture in his drawer for years. It's torn at the corner, but he never threw it away. When night fell, I unrolled an air mattress in the living room. The sound of the ocean drifted through the door. Steady like breathing. I lay there watching the faint light from their room. Hearing their quiet conversation, Mom's soft laughter, Dad's murmured reply, and suddenly my heart felt warm in a way I hadn't felt for years. At dawn, I woke early, made coffee, and stood on the porch facing the sea. The water was still, reflecting a sky pale like milk. Mom was still asleep, Dad lying on his side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. I captured that moment in my mind like a photograph that would never fade. I wrote a small note and tucked it into the top kitchen drawer, for slow mornings and loud laughter. Love, Delaney. Then I closed the door softly, hearing the hinges sigh. The scent of lemon lingered, and the wind still carried the sound of the waves gentle. Like the house itself was breathing. That morning, the sun scattered across the ocean like thousands of tiny mirrors. I hadn't called ahead. I just wanted to surprise them the way they used to surprise me in college. Showing up at my dorm with a basket of food, eyes lighting up when they saw me. But that joy vanished the second I saw a black SUV parked across the driveway. It wasn't my father's. Too new, too shiny, and the license plate was from another state. I slowed down, tires crunching over gravel. The front door was wide open, curtains fluttering in the wind. From inside came music, laughter, and the high-pitched shrieks of children. I frowned. This house had always been quiet, just my parents. Gentle and calm. Those sounds didn't belong here. I stepped out of the car. The moment my foot hit the porch, the smell of beer mixed with cheap perfume hit me. Voices overlapped. Cans rolled across the wooden floor. My heart sank, as if it already knew something had broken. I pushed open the door and everything went silent. Mom stood in the kitchen, clutching a dish towel like it was her last grip on sanity. Dad sat by the door, hands trembling on his knees. Around them were pizza boxes, beer cans, and clothes scattered everywhere. And in the middle of the room, right where I had once handed them the keys, stood Cassidy. My sister, phone in hand, live streaming. The ring light cast a glow on her perfectly made-up face. Her voice was bright, animated. Finally manifested our dream home. She chirped to hundreds of viewers, smiling wide, as if this place had always belonged to her. Mom turned toward me, eyes red, then looked down. Unable to meet my gaze, Dad tilted his head slightly, saying nothing. From behind her, a man's voice called out. Who are you talking to? Evan appeared, beer bottle in hand, barefoot, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt. He squinted at me, paused for a moment, then smirked. Well, look who's here, the famous big sister. Welcome to our new family home. He dragged out the word home, emphasizing it deliberately. I looked around, trying to process what I was seeing. On the wall, my parents' wedding photo had been replaced by a framed family portrait of Cassidy, Evan, and 2 kids. The small wooden sign I'd given them, "Welcome Home, Sam and Ruth," had been taken down, lying face down in the corner cabinet. "Cassidy, what is this?" She lowered her phone, trying to sound casual. "Just showing our new place to my followers?" "Don't be so serious." "New place," I repeated, locking eyes with her. "You're talking about this house." Evan stepped in, waving his hand dismissively. "Of course. You didn't expect two elderly people to live here alone forever, did you? Your sister's right, this house needs younger people to take care of it. We'll manage it, clean it up, fix things, maybe rent it out during high season." Mom spoke up, her voice so small it was nearly swallowed by the wind. "Delaney, I meant to tell you, but they showed up unexpectedly. I thought they were just staying for a few days." I turned to her. Her eyes were lost, like someone who'd stepped into quicksand and couldn't pull free. I spoke gently. "Mom, I'm not angry, just tell me the truth. When did this start?" Dad exhaled, voice rough. "2 days ago. They said they were visiting. Then the next morning, they brought their things." Evan cut in. "We're not guests. This is a family house. You bought it with family money. Gave it to your parents means you gave it to all of us. Everyone has a share." I stared at him for a long moment. A chill ran down my spine. "I don't recall seeing your name anywhere in that trust agreement, Evan." He scoffed, voice dripping with mockery. "Family law doesn't work like your hospital rules. Don't bring that tone here." Cassidy folded her arms, looking at me with that mix of disdain and smugness. "You always overreact. We just want Mom and Dad to be comfortable. The house is lovely, but they can't climb stairs or tend the garden forever. Evan and I will take care of that. In exchange, we'll stay here for the summer, that's all." Toys littered the floor. Beer cans and snack wrappers covered the counter. The wall where Dad had hung their wedding photo was now smudged with greasy fingerprints. I said nothing. I walked to the corner, picked up the little wooden sign they'd discarded, and brushed the dust off it with my sleeve. Evan lifted his chin, his voice arrogant. "Hey, you, seems like you've forgotten this is the family's house. If you're not comfortable, just take a break and let the younger ones handle things." I turned to him, eyes fixed. "What did you just say?" "I said the old folks should stay downstairs. It's dangerous if they fall on the stairs. We'll take the upper floor, handle everything. Win-win." My mother gasped softly. "Evan, that's enough. This is our house." He turned to her with a smirk. "I'm just trying to help, Mom. We're doing this out of love." Cassidy placed a hand on Mom's shoulder, her voice sweet but sharp. "Don't get upset. Mom, Evan's just thinking of you." "But her." She glanced at me. "She always has to control everything." I smiled, though even I barely recognized my own voice. Maybe because I'm the only one who still sees what's really happening. My father tried to stand, but Evan stepped forward, blocking him with a beer-scented wave of his hand. "You should rest. Dafkers. These stairs aren't meant for someone your age anymore." I took a step closer, my voice low but clear. "Did you just touch my father?" Evan sneered. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops? They'll ask why you're throwing family out of their own home." Cassidy stepped in, her tone suddenly soft, pretending to be the victim. "Sis, I know you've worked hard, but money doesn't always buy happiness." I looked straight into her eyes, and for a brief second, I saw the same eyes that once belonged to a little girl riding behind me on a bicycle, laughing endlessly. But now, all that remained was cold calculation. "Help," I said quietly. "You call forcing our parents out of their own home help." I walked slowly toward the table and glanced down at Cassidy's phone. Still live streaming, hearts and comments kept flooding in. "So beautiful. Dream house." I reached over and turned off the screen. The room seemed to freeze. Cassidy snatched the phone, her voice sharp and high. "What are you doing?" I was live. "I know," I said. "And you were just broadcasting yourself stealing your parents' house to the whole world." Evan set his beer bottle down on the table, his face flushed. "All right, you're clever. But don't think you can tell us how to live." My father still sat there, hands clenched. My mother pressed against the wall, tears running down her face but forcing a weak smile, trying to calm things down. In that moment, I realized I no longer had the strength to stay silent. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Evan, get out of this house. You too, Cassidy." Cassidy's eyes widened, then she laughed. "Who do you think you are?" I answered evenly, voice cold. "The only one who still has the right to protect what you've never learned to value." Evan squinted, stepping closer, his breath thick with alcohol. Try kicking us out, doctor. I didn't move back. The reek of beer and his breath was inches from my face, but I kept my gaze steady, my tone icy calm. Watch your words, Evan. I've repaired broken hearts my whole career, but I've never seen one as rotten as yours. He gave a harsh, empty laugh. Behind him, Cassidy's voice wavered. Stop it, Evan. But he growled back. I told you she thinks she can buy this whole family. My father pushed his chair slightly, trying to rise, but Mom grabbed his hand and shook her head. I looked at them, then back at Evan. My eyes stopped at his hand, the beer bottle trembling, foam spilling over the rim. I spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. You'll learn soon enough that what you're holding isn't power, it's a limit. Evan slammed the bottle onto the table. The sharp clink echoed through the room. Prove it then, he said, voice low but eyes bloodshot. I didn't answer. I turned toward Mom, gave her a small, reassuring nod, and walked out. The wind from the bay swept in, carrying salt and damp cold, erasing the sound of the door closing behind me. I knew that if I stayed one more minute, I'd say something I could never take back. As I stepped down the porch, I glanced through the window. Mom was still sitting at the table's edge, her small shoulders trembling. Dad gently rubbed her back. I got into my car and started the engine. The sea ahead was dark, only the waves breaking against the rocks in a steady rhythm, like a metronome for my own heartbeat, forcing it to slow, the way I'd learned in the operating room to keep from collapsing mid-chaos. I knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. That night, I drove back to the city. I couldn't remember how many turns I'd made. All I could hear was the echo of voices from that house. Evan's, Cassidy's, and my mother's. Faint and fading like a broken melody, I reached my apartment close to midnight. The city was quiet, only the distant wail of an ambulance, a familiar sound that made me think of the hospital, of surgeries so long they blurred into exhaustion. I used to believe that with a clear plan and enough control, everything could stay in order, but life isn't an operating room. In surgery, I can remove what's damaged. In family, the damage is what people cling to. I poured a glass of water, set it on the table, and opened my laptop. The screen lit up, reflecting my face in the glass calm. But underneath, a numbing cold, I logged into the shared account my father had given me access to, just to check that the bills were still in order. But instead of the usual payments, a new notification blinked in the corner. New booking confirmed, seaside retreat by the bay. I clicked it, my chest tightened. The registered host's name, Evan Callahan. I stared at it for a long time until the cursor blinked in the search bar, urging me to dig deeper. The booking list appeared every weekend, fully booked. Each line showed a payment amount, each one marked confirmed. I opened one of the listings. The photos were of my house, my parents' house, with the balcony facing the ocean. The white wooden table. The pale blue curtains fluttering in the breeze. But the description below froze my blood. Entire oceanfront home. No host on site. No host, I repeated the phrase in my head. It sounded like a declaration. They had erased my parents from the very home I had placed in their hands with love. Scrolling to the bottom, I found the payout account section, the account receiving the rental income. The last 4 digits, 3,784. I recognized it instantly. Evan had used that account when he borrowed money from me 5 years ago. I still had the message. Just temporary. Promised to return it within the month. I'd never seen that money again, and now I knew I never would. I opened the documents folder where my father kept the house purchase files. Among the old scans was a new file titled, Authorization Form, Trust Access. I clicked. On the screen appeared an asset authorization form, complete with a forged trust seal. The signatures read Samuel Pierce and Ruth Pierce. But I knew immediately those weren't my parents' handwriting. My father wrote slowly, neatly. Each line precise. The signatures here were rushed, the strokes heavy, like someone eager to finish. At the bottom was an electronic signature, Evan Callahan, and under witness, Cassidy Pierce. The wall clock ticked with a dry, mechanical sound. What I felt now wasn't anger, it was something colder, spreading from inside, the kind of cold that comes when you realize you've been feeding the wolf with your own compassion. I opened Cassidy's old email folder. She'd once asked me to help her set up her bank account there. Old messages surfaced, and near the bottom was a new one titled, Let's handle this smart. I opened it. Just one short line, but enough to make my throat tighten. If she finds out, let Mom cry. She always breaks when Mom cries. I read it again and again until the words blurred on the screen. A drop of water fell onto the keyboard. I wasn't sure if it was from my eyes or the glass. I laughed softly, soundless, let Mom cry. My sister knew me too well. She knew that a single tear from Mom could make me fold every rational thought, forget every line I'd drawn. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. When I'm silent, it's never out of fear, it's because I'm calculating. In my profession, silence always comes before the scalpel. The next morning, I met Martin, an old friend, the attorney who'd helped me set up the trust. He looked through the papers I handed him, reading slowly, his brow furrowing. "This is blatant forgery," he said. "But you'll need proof your parents never signed any copies, even for reference." I know. They were convinced it was all for convenience. Whatever Evan said, they believed. "So what's your plan?" "I'll take the house back legally, but decisively, and I'll make sure they understand one thing. My kindness is not an asset that can be transferred." Martin nodded. He didn't ask further. He'd known me long enough to understand that when I said, decisively, it meant every step had already been planned. Back home, I reopened my laptop, printed every email, screenshot, Airbnb payment receipt, and the forged authorization form. I numbered each page and clipped them neatly into a separate folder. In red pen, I circled every line where Cassidy mentioned family trust and authorization. It looked like a medical case file, only this time the patient was my own family. A while later, my phone lit up. A message from Mom. "Delaney, don't be angry with your sister. She said she just wants to make things easier for us. Evan says he's helping, not taking anything from anyone." I stared at the text, my throat tightening. I started typing a reply, deleted it, then typed again. Finally, I wrote only this. "Mom, don't sign anything else, no matter who gives it to you. Even if they say it's from me, don't sign." After a few minutes, she replied, "I promise, but please don't make it a big deal." "Okay, I don't want everyone upset." I set the phone down, feeling the weight settle in my chest. People say love is about giving, but they forget that sometimes, giving endlessly is the very thing that teaches others to forget your boundaries. I turned on the desk lamp, and the light spilled across the thick file. In the corner, I wrote a small line in pencil. Phase 1, evidence collection. Careful, quiet, like preparing for a complex surgery. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Reclaim the house, reclaim my parents' voice, and more importantly, reclaim the boundaries I had allowed them to erase for far too long. If they chose to start this war out of greed, I'll end it with clarity. I placed the documents on the table: trust contract, Airbnb screenshots showing no owner on site, payment receipts, the forged authorization file, and a string of messages Cassidy had sent Evan. The light caught the edges of the papers, making them look sharp, cold. I had no time for dramatic speeches. The truth was heavy enough to speak for itself. Cassidy gave a quick laugh, trying to lighten the moment like an actress in the wrong scene. "You're overreacting, sis. I just wanted to make things easier for Mom and Dad." I looked at her, my voice even. "Easier. By erasing their names from the house they've lived in their whole lives, turning their home into a rental property. Easier for who? Cassidy." Evan stepped forward, raising his voice as if volume could blur boundaries. "This is a family matter. Don't bring your legal threats in here." I opened the forged authorization file and showed them each detail. The fake seal, the scanned signatures, the witness line with Cassidy's name. I placed my hand over the payout section. The account number is clearly visible. "This is evidence," I said. "You used this account to receive rental payments. She witnessed it, and you listed the property as no owner on site. Do you even know what no owner on site means? It means you rented out someone else's home for profit." Evan frowned, trying to argue. "It was temporary. It's summer, everyone's looking to make a little extra cash. Temporary is when you ask first. What you did was sell my parents' space to strangers. You call that temporary. I call it manipulation." Cassidy cleared her throat, trying to soften her tone. "Delaney, I know you worry about Mom. I just thought I could take better care of them. I didn't mean to do something wrong." My mother stood in the kitchen corner, eyes red, forcing a weak smile to ease the tension. I stepped closer, took her hand gently, squeezing just enough to tell her I was there. Then I let go, turned back to Cassidy. "Take care of them. By tearing apart their ownership rights. That's what you call care." The energy in the room shifted. You don't always have to shout to draw a line. Sometimes one document, one number, and calm conviction are enough to make people step back. I raised my phone, opening the email draft I'd already prepared, one message to Airbnb's management, one to the HOA, one to the notary of the family trust, and one copy already sent to my attorney. Each email included evidence screenshots of the listing, payment records, and the forged authorization with my notes. I scrolled to the bottom and pressed send for each. Right in front of them, Cassidy's mouth fell open. Evan's eyes went wide, as if what I'd done was unthinkable. "I can delete the listing," Evan barked. "If you blow this up, you'll ruin everything." I stayed unmoved. "You can try, but the platform's already received my report. I've also contacted the bank regarding the suspicious transactions. If you keep taking money, you'll be facing fraud charges." Evan's hand trembled as he stepped forward, his composure cracking. He wanted to shout louder, to reclaim control, but noise isn't always power. I slowly opened another email and pressed play a recording. I'd saved from my father's phone when he sent it to me, confused about the document. It was my mother's voice, breaking as she discovered the forged authorization, and then Cassidy's whisper, "Let Mom cry. It'll be easier." Evan tried to cut through the silence with bluster. "You wouldn't dare follow through, would you? You're just a doctor. We have a right to make a living." "I don't need to threaten," I replied calmly. "I've already sent reports to the tax office, the booking platform, the HOA, and my lawyer. I've arranged to revoke access and called a locksmith before coming here. You'll see the locks changed within hours, and every booking canceled." Evan lunged. As if to grab the documents, Cassidy cried out, grabbing his arm. "Don't." But he moved anyway until the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Everyone froze. I gestured for my mother to step back. Through the small window on the porch, I saw the reflection of a van with a locksmith service logo and a broad-shouldered man waiting patiently. "Victor," I'd called him while driving here. He stepped inside, carrying a box of locks and tools, nodding politely. "Sorry for the delay, Ms. Delaney. Shall I start the replacement?" Evan glared at him, furious, as the metallic clinks echoed across the wooden floor like a drumbeat marking the shift of control. I stood still, almost casually, but everything had already been planned. The locksmith, the reports, the evidence submitted. The rest was procedure. There was nothing left to argue. The only weapon Evan had now was shouting, and by the time the locks clicked shut, even that noise would fade like wind in a house finally being returned to its rightful owners. Cassidy sank to the floor, holding her head, like someone realizing she'd just lost her role in her own play. When the locksmith finished, he placed the new keys on the table and let my parents choose their code. I knelt beside my father, guiding his fingers onto my phone for fingerprint access. Victor programmed the system with their chosen passcode. Dad smiled faintly. The first time I'd seen a smile without worry behind it. Mom cried, but this time, her tears didn't weaken me. They were tears of awakening. While Victor secured the final lock, I kept working, calling the platform to confirm cancellations, messaging my lawyer to send a cease and desist notice to Evan, reporting the short-term rental violation to the HOA, and emailing the bank about the flagged transactions. Each call was a stitch, sealing the breaches they had tried to open. Cassidy finally stood, tears streaking her cheeks. She reached for Mom's hand. "Mom, I'm sorry, I just wanted us to have a safe place, without worries." Mom looked at her, weary but firmer than before. "I don't want anyone lying to themselves." Her words were like medicine, not enough to heal the wound, but enough to make silence stop bleeding. I wasn't here to punish, but to rebuild a boundary one she had crossed too easily. When things calmed, I made tea for my parents. The warmth steadied their hands. I sat across from Cassidy. There was no softness in my eyes, only a clear demand, accountability. "Pack your things," I said quietly, "and delete every post. Now, if you don't, we will, and then legal action follows." Cassidy nodded, tears still falling, not from fear of court, but from realizing that the house truly belonged to the people crying on the floor. Evan muttered something about trying to fix this, but his eyes burned with resentment. As they began packing a few bags, I stood and quietly cleaned the table, gathering beer cans into a trash bag, wiping crumbs, restoring small order to chaos. I placed the wooden sign, "Welcome Home, Sam and Ruth," back on the table, brushing off the dust. My parents watched me, their eyes full of gratitude, exhaustion, and a hint of uncertainty about what came next. I didn't have answers for everything. I just knew I'd stepped in at the right moment. What I'd done wasn't to appear heroic. It was to ensure that when Mom calls Delaney at midnight because of a strange noise, she won't have to fear who might walk into her house to collect rent. When Cassidy and Evan finally left quiet, carrying a few bags, I stood by the doorway, listening to the car engine fade into the salty air. Then I went back inside, closed the door, checked the alarm system, locked every cabinet holding paperwork, and sat beside my parents. I poured more tea, watched them sip, saw their eyes soften slightly. I knew it wasn't over. Recovery never is. But this time, I wouldn't let silence ruin everything again. After Cassidy and Evan left, the house settled into quiet, not emptiness, but the stillness that follows a storm. I stood in the living room, looking around at the traces they'd left: beer cans, crumbs, shoe prints on the wooden floor, and small fragments of shattered trust. The air still carried a faint mix of cigarette smoke and lemon cleaner, two scents that didn't belong together. Wrestling for space, I began to clean, each chair pulled back into place, each picture frame straightened, each curtain tied to let the light in. I picked up every small item gently, afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had just returned. Dad sat on the porch steps, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the sea. Mom knelt in the kitchen corner, scrubbing the floor, her back trembling from the chill. I walked over, laid a hand on her shoulder. "Mom, take a break. Let me do it." She shook her head, voice hoarse. "It's all right, I need to do it myself. I have to feel it with my own hands to know this is our home again." I said nothing. Just knelt beside her. Together, we washed the cups, cleaned the dishes, wiped the counters and the table. When I opened the last drawer, I found a folded piece of paper, edges frayed, tucked under the silverware tray. I unfolded it. It was a crayon, drawing clumsy but bright with sunlight, two girls holding hands in front of a house drawn in blue. At the bottom corner, written in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "My sister is my hero." I froze, my heart tightening. Mom looked up, saw the paper in my hand, and let out a quiet sigh. "Cassidy drew that when she was 8. Mom said. "The day you left for school. Do you remember? She cried for hours. Said that when she grew up, she'd make money and buy a house for you." I smiled, but my voice trembled. "Maybe she forgot, Mom." She placed her hand over mine, a gentle, warm, but sorrowful touch. I folded the paper and set it on the table beside the wooden sign that now stood upright again. "Welcome home, Sam and Ruth." Outside, my father spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the calm. "You didn't destroy anything, Delaney. You just stopped it from being destroyed." I looked up at him. His frame was thinner, his shoulders slightly stooped, but in his eyes was a light I hadn't seen in years. I sat down beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. "I'm afraid I went too far," I whispered. "I'm afraid I made our family more broken." "Families don't break because of truth, Delaney. They break when lies live too long." Something inside my chest caught a quiet, choked sob that never escaped. After a while, Mom joined us, carrying 3 cups of hot tea. The scent of mint drifted through the air, blending with the damp wood. She looked out toward the sea, her eyes glistening under the warm light. "Now, this house truly belongs to us." I turned and saw tears rolling down her cheeks. But this time, there was no trembling, no fear. They were tears of release. I wiped them away and looked around the house. Every corner, every sound of the wind slipping through the cracks felt like a new breath of life. I stood and opened the window to let the breeze in. The waves rushed through, no longer drowned out by laughter or loud music. Only the sound of nature remained steady, real, and pure. In the kitchen, Dad was folding the tablecloth. Mom poured more tea. I watched them, suddenly realizing this scene was more beautiful than any mansion I'd ever designed in my mind. I turned to pick up the children's toys, neatly placing them into a box. Inside were a few seashells and small stones with marker letters. "Beach Summer, Cassidy." I touched each one, feeling something both familiar and distant. Maybe, in her memories, love had once been real. It was just tangled with too much ambition. I gathered the scraps, swept the floor clean, and turned on the hallway light. The warm glow spread across the wall where my parents' wedding photo had returned to its rightful place. Under the light, they smiled down at us. The 3 remaining pieces of a home finally pieced back together. After years of fracture, Mom walked over, resting lightly against my shoulder. "Are you tired?" "Not tired, Mom. Just empty, but lighter." She nodded, her eyes shimmering. "This house is at peace now, Delaney. Truly at peace." I brushed my fingers over the wooden sign, tracing the faded corner of the words. "Welcome home, Sam and Ruth." In that moment I realized, This house wasn't just a gift, it was a promise. That sometimes, to keep love intact, you have to take responsibility for the ruins too. That night, I walked through the house, turning off each light, locking the doors, checking the alarm. Everything was tidy, secure, calm. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw my parents sitting together, their teacups still steaming, their heads leaning close like two young lovers. Mom whispered something small, and they both laughed. A simple, complete sound. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about laws, or files, or revenge, or proof. I just felt my heart ease as if the sea had finally stopped raging. In the dim light, I saw the drawing still lying on the table. I walked over and unfolded it again. Two girls holding hands in front of a small house. Beneath the crooked, childish handwriting, the words still read, "My sister is my hero." I smiled not out of forgiveness, but out of understanding. That memory, though warped by time, was still a part of me. I thought that once the house was calm again, the storm inside me would quiet too. But some storms don't fade, they just change form. I received the envelope on a Monday morning while in the operating room. A nurse handed it to me, saying it was marked urgent, a white envelope, printed with the name of a Boston law office. I slid it open with surgical scissors, my eyes scanning the first lines and, for a moment, I thought I was reading it wrong. Plaintiff Cassidy Pierce. Claim: misappropriation of family trust and abuse of shared assets. I set the paper down and took a deep breath. The monitor in the room kept its steady rhythm, the patient's heartbeat stable, but mine wasn't. I let out a quiet, almost mocking laugh. My sister, the one I had just saved from clear fraud, was now recasting herself as the victim. That afternoon, I drove to Attorney Martin's office. He greeted me with a look that mixed surprise and weariness. "I assume you've read the file," he said, sliding the folder toward me. I opened it. On the first page was the complaint, phrased artfully. Defendant Delaney Pierce utilized the family trust as a means of personal image building, depriving other family members of their legal rights. I gave a thin smile. Nicely written, great PR. Martin sighed. They hired a media firm. I'd say a few online outlets will pick this up within 24 hours. So they want me afraid of public opinion. They want your reputation bruised, he replied, then paused. But they don't know you're not the kind of person who breaks that way. I leaned back in the chair, gazing out the window where Boston was sinking into the afternoon fog. You know, Martin, I used to think if you saved someone enough times, they'd understand, and now you know the opposite. Yeah, that when people get used to being rescued, they start believing they deserve it. He said nothing, just set a cup of coffee in front of me. The faint bitterness steadied the tightness in my chest. 2 weeks later, the case was accepted for trial. I remember the first morning in court. It was drizzling. The streets slick and gray. Mom called before the hearing. "Don't take it to heart. Honey, your sister's just confused. She'll realize soon," I answered softly. "Mom, she's not confused. She's calculating. She just picked the wrong opponent this time." The courtroom was small, its white lights reflecting off cold walls. Cassidy sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a light-colored suit, her hair curled softly. As if ready for a TV interview, Evan sat beside her, face flushed, eyes avoiding mine. When I entered, her gaze swept over me, half defiant, half nervous. I didn't look away. I met her eyes calmly and took my seat at the defendant's side. The judge, a middle-aged woman, spoke with firmness but not severity. Once the case was announced, Cassidy's lawyer launched into a polished speech, painting me as a powerful daughter, a symbol of success, but obsessed with control. He claimed I had used my parents' names to monopolize family assets, exploited their trust, and intentionally damaged family bonds to protect my public image. I listened to every word without reacting, eyes fixed forward. Across the room, Cassidy dabbed at her eyes now and then, perfectly timed tears for effect. When the judge asked, "Would you like to add anything, Ms. Pierce?" Cassidy looked up, her voice catching just enough. "I just want fairness. I want my sister to stop using our parents to prove she's better than me." I turned away, biting my lip to suppress a sigh. She had turned the truth into a performance, and I was cast as the perfect villain. When it was our turn, Martin smiled faintly, opened his leather case, and pulled out 3 documents. "Your Honor, this is the trust agreement signed 4 months ago, with verified notarization." He flipped through each page, pointing out the legitimate seals and my parents' real signatures. "And this," he said, raising the second paper. Is the asset authorization submitted by the plaintiff for tax purposes? Handwriting analysis confirms both signatures here are forged. He paused, lowering his tone but keeping it clear. The forged signatures belong to the person who filed this complaint. The courtroom fell silent, save for the soft rustle of paper. Cassidy's face drained of color, her lips trembled. Evan turned away, wiping his forehead. Then Martin placed the third exhibit on the stand, a printed screenshot of the message between Cassidy and Evan, reading, "If she finds out, let Mom cry. She always breaks when Mom cries." He spoke each word slowly, evenly. This is not the evidence of someone seeking justice. This is the evidence of someone who knows they are manipulating others. I didn't look at her. Even a glance of pity could be twisted. I stayed still, my hands clasped tightly together, cold as marble. The judge glanced through the file, then looked up. "Ms. Cassidy Pierce, do you have anything to say in response?" Cassidy opened her mouth, but couldn't speak. Her eyes were red, and her voice broke apart. I just wanted to." But no words followed. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. When the verdict was announced, the judge's voice was clear and firm. The court rejects the plaintiff's claim. Ownership and management of the property remain with Mr. and Mrs. Samuel and Ruth Pierce, under the lawful supervision of the appointed trustee, Dr. Delaney Pierce. Any parties involved in signature forgery will be subject to separate investigation. Cassidy collapsed into her seat, her face pale. Evan stood abruptly, about to say something. But the judge's gavel struck, ending it. The sound echoed like a door closing on a house whose key they no longer held. As I walked out, the hallway was bathed in the soft light of afternoon. Behind me, Cassidy's voice broke out, no longer an act, but a raw scream. "You won, didn't you? Are you happy now?" I turned back and looked at her one last time. Her face was wet with tears, a mixture of rage and despair. I stepped closer, just enough for my words to be heard, but not loud enough to echo. "You can live without this house, Cassidy, but I can't live without boundaries." She froze. For a brief second, something shattered in her eyes, not regret, but the realization that I was no longer standing anywhere she could pull me back from. I turned away and stepped outside. The cold air brushed past, carrying the scent of early rain. I lifted my head toward the sky. Above, the clouds were breaking apart in the wind. I walked slowly toward the parking lot, the sound of my heels striking the stone floor steady like the heartbeat of someone regaining rhythm after a long surgery. Autumn light by the bay always had its own tone, clear yet faintly melancholic, as if even the sun knew how to bow after too many bright days. I drove along the coastal road, the window half down, letting the wind carry in the salt and the sound of waves. Ahead, the small white house came into view, so peaceful that if you didn't know what had once happened there, you might think it was just a modest home for an elderly couple. My father sat in a wicker chair on the porch, the Boston Globe spread open before him, a cup of tea, half cold. My mother watered a row of yellow chrysanthemums along the fence, slow and careful, as if every petal were a prayer. When she saw my car stop, she smiled a smile without worry now, only gentle warmth. I stepped out, breathing in the salty air and damp earth. "What are you reading, Dad?" He looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Just the news. These days, it's all about divorces and lawsuits. Everyone fighting to win. Not much about keeping peace." I smiled faintly. Maybe peace isn't flashy enough for headlines, but it's what people crave the most after the storms. Dad folded the paper, setting it aside, gazing out toward the sea. His voice was low but steady. "Storms aren't always bad. They show you whether your house was built strong enough." I sat beside him. The sea breeze made his teacup tremble slightly. Mom came out, a cloth in hand, wiping the last drops of water from the table. "When you show up, I know the wind's changing," she said softly. "Every time you drive here, the sea calms down a little." I held her hand gently. Her skin was thin and lined, like paper, but still warm. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Now I'm truly well. Not because of medicine, but because I can finally sleep in peace. Every night, I hear the waves, and my heart feels calm." I looked out at the clear sky. For a moment, I heard my own laughter, the younger version of me, too rigid, too rational, thinking perfection could control everything. But now, I'd learned to let the wind blow, to let the waves come and go, to let people leave without holding on with resentment. In my coat pocket, I had a small card I'd written the night before, each line neat and deliberate. I didn't know if my parents would fully understand it, but I knew I needed to leave it. Inside, I placed the card on the wooden shelf beside the family photo, the one taken on Mom's birthday last year. Before all the chaos, Cassidy was in it too, standing beside me, smiling brightly, her arms around my shoulders as if nothing in the world could separate us. I looked at the photo for a long time, then slid the card beneath the frame. A single line read, "If Cassidy returns, open the door but only if she knocks." I knew Mom would understand. She always understood what I didn't say out loud. It wasn't rejection, it was a lesson. Love can't be forced. If my sister ever chose to come back, the door would still be there, but this time, she'd have to learn to respect the space within. I stepped back onto the porch. The wind had shifted, carrying a stronger scent of salt. In the distance, the sun was sinking low, laying a golden path across the water. Dad was brewing another pot of tea. Mom sat on the steps, stroking the neighbor's old cat they were looking after. The scene was so peaceful I wanted to stay there forever, just watching them, listening to the waves, with no need for words. Dad spoke after a while, his tone thoughtful. "Delaney, do you ever feel regret?" I looked at him, a little surprised. "Regret about what? That things can't go back to how they were." "No, Dad. I only regret letting things go wrong for so long before stopping them. But if I had to do it again, I'd still make the same choice." He nodded silently. The sky deepened into violet, the waves steady, the water brushing the shore like a distant heartbeat. I looked at the house, the roof glowing under the sunset, the white walls reflecting a soft, human warmth. I remembered the nights I'd sat in my car, watching this house in darkness, heavy with worry, and now it glowed. As if breathing again, Mom rose and switched on the porch light. The golden glow spilled across the wooden floor, warm and tender. She turned to me with a gentle smile. "Every night I turn this light on so your father remembers the way home." Dad chuckled softly. "At my age, if I got lost now, that'd be embarrassing." I stayed a little longer, then stood. My parents walked me to the door. Mom wore a thin cardigan, waving, her voice raspy but kind. "Next time you visit, bring me some apple pie." "All right. I promise," I said, smiling. I opened the car door and looked back one last time. The porch light was still shining, glinting off the little wooden sign on the wall. Dad had repainted the name Pierce, the letters slightly shaky but beautiful. I started the engine. The headlights swept across the low trees before merging with the coastal road. Behind me, the small house faded into the mist, the golden light still glowing through it like a farewell that never ends. I thought then that love isn't about holding on, nor about enduring. It's about knowing when to lock the door while still leaving the light on. The light stays on to remind you, your heart still knows how to care. But the lock to remind you that caring must have limits. Sometimes, I still think of that night, the soft porch light, the rhythm of waves, and that peace you can't buy with money or late apologies. I think maybe all of us, someday, have to learn how to love without losing ourselves. If you understand that feeling, tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever had to draw a boundary with someone you love? Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, so we can share more stories that remind us. Kindness when it knows its limits is still the greatest strength of all.